Usually when we talk about making an assessment, like a diagnosis of a situation, there's this expectation of precision.
Right, like it's a science.
Yeah. It's like engineering or something. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is, broken.
Exactly.
It's binary, it's clean. And, I mean, it's comforting because we really like things to be visible, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be categorized neatly into good and bad or success and failure.
We love a clean binary.
We do. But then you step into the world of human leadership, of moral failure, and especially divine grace, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just completely broken.
Oh.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, honestly, it's incredibly murky.
Oh, absolutely.
So today, for those of you joining us, we are taking a rigorous, primary source, heavy, scholarly survey of the Old Testament book of 2 Samuel. We're approaching it from our conservative evangelical perspective, and our mission for you today in this deep dive is, well, it's simple, but it is definitely not easy.
No, not at all.
We want to cut through the dense theological and historical data of this ancient text to really uncover the profound, emotional, literary, and redemptive arc of King David's reign.
Because if you approach 2 Samuel simply as a dry historical log, you are going to misread it entirely. I mean, you'll miss the whole point.
Right. It's not an encyclopedia.
Exactly. It is a highly sophisticated piece of what scholars call theological historiography. It speaks directly to the structural failures of human leadership, while at the exact same time mapping out this unstoppable, relentless nature of divine grace. So we are going to treat this biblical text like the high-stakes political thriller and, frankly, the masterful literary novel that it truly is.
I love that, a political thriller. Set the stage for you. Let's establish what 2 Samuel actually is.
Mm.
Historically, 1 and 2 Samuel were originally a single unified book, right?
Yes, exactly, one scroll.
And they're only divided later on, the Greek translation, the Septuagint, for a highly practical reason. The material was simply too long to fit onto a single standard-sized scroll.
Right, it was just a physical limitation. They literally chopped it in half.
So they chopped it in half. But thematically, the division actually works, doesn't it?
It works remarkably well. Because while 1 Samuel records the painful transition from a theocracy to a monarchy, ending with the tragic failure and death of Israel's first king, 2 Samuel is, well, it's hyper-focused.
It really zeroes in.
It zeroes in almost exclusively on the 40-year reign of King David, which historians date from approximately 1010 BC to 971 BC.
Okay, so a very specific window.
Very specific. And we're analyzing David's transition from being a regional leader, ruling over just the tribe of Judah down in Hebron, to becoming the unifier of all 12 tribes of Israel, and eventually establishing his centralized capital in Jerusalem, or, as it's often called, Zion.
40 years of history packed with absolute drama. But before we get to the drama, we have to look at the board the game is being played on.
Yeah.
To really understand the text, you have to understand the world it was born into.
You really do.
Let's talk about the setting in life, what's going on around them.
Right, what scholars call the Sitzim Leben. To truly grasp the world of 2 Samuel, we have to evaluate the geopolitical landscape of the ancient Near East during what archaeologists classify as Iron Age Thyia.
Iron Age Thyia. Got it.
Yeah, this is the 10th century BC. And what's fascinating here is that there was a massive, completely unprecedented power vacuum in the Levant at this specific time.
Oh, interesting. A power vacuum.
Yes. If you look at the major global superpowers of that era, mainly the Egyptian New Kingdom to the south and the Middle Assyrian Empire to the north and east, both of them are experiencing severe periods of domestic decline.
Just totally stagnating.
Exactly. Stagnate.
Let me make sure I'm picturing this right for you guys listening.
Yeah.
You have Egypt, which usually dominates the southern trade routes, right?
Yeah.
And Assyria, which usually terrorizes everyone from the north.
Mhm.
What exactly is happening to them that takes them off the board so completely?
Well, in Egypt, the glorious New Kingdom period has just collapsed into what we call the Third Intermediate Period. The 21st dynasty is fractured. Power is actually divided between Tanis in the north and the high priests of Amun in Thebes to the south, so they are politically weak, and they are entirely looking inward.
They're too busy fighting themselves to worry about Israel.
Precisely. And meanwhile, the Middle Assyrian Empire is dealing with aggressive incursions from Aramean tribes, plus severe internal political instability. Neither empire has the resources or the political will to project power into the Levant.
The Levant being that narrow strip of land where Israel sits.
Exactly.
Okay, so think about this like the modern business world. You have these massive legacy tech giants, Egypt and Assyria. They are bloated. They are distracted by internal restructuring, maybe dealing with antitrust lawsuits or whatever the ancient equivalent of that
They're
is.
civil wars, usually.
Right. Civil wars. And right in the middle of them, in this total geopolitical blind spot, you have a nimble, aggressive startup. That's David's Israel.
I like that analogy.
Because the legacy empires are distracted, this startup is able to rapidly expand, centralize its power, and achieve regional hegemony without getting crushed by the big guys.
The startup analogy definitely works for the speed and the timing of David's military expansion, but, and this is important, we have to be careful with it.
How so?
Well, unlike a modern tech startup that can pivot its core values or cut corners to maximize profit, David's company was governed by strict, ancient covenantal laws that he had no authority to alter.
Ah, right. He's not the ultimate CEO.
Exactly. He's a vassal. But you are absolutely right about the geopolitical window of opportunity. This vacuum is what allows David to conquer surrounding nations like Moab, Ammon, and Edom, creating an empire that stretched from the river of Egypt all the way up to the Euphrates.
So we have this massive expansion happening in a very specific historical window. But who actually wrote this down? I mean, from our conservative evangelical view, how do you know we aren't just reading mythology written centuries later?
That's a crucial question. Evaluating both internal textual clues and external traditions actually confirms the historical integrity of this book. Technically, yes, the text is anonymous.
Right, there's no signature at the bottom of the scroll saying, by Nathan.
Exactly. However, ancient Jewish tradition, specifically preserved in the Talmud in Tractate Baba Bathra 14b, attributes the primary recording of these events to the prophet Samuel, with the subsequent material completed by the prophets Nathan and Gad.
Wait, hold on. Samuel dies way back in 1 Samuel 25. I mean, he couldn't have written 2 Samuel.
Which is exactly why the Talmudic tradition includes Nathan and Gad. And this multi-author prophetic composition finds incredibly firm internal biblical support.
Where do we see that?
If you turn to 1 Chronicles 29.29, the author explicitly references 3 distinct source documents for David's reign. He mentions the Chronicles of Samuel the seer, the Chronicles of Nathan the prophet, and the Chronicles of Gad the seer.
Okay, so what does a chronicler or a prophet actually do in this context? Are they just, sitting in a room meditating, or are they out in the field?
That's a great distinction. Nathan and Gad weren't just distant, mystical observers. They were eyewitness recorders. Gad is specifically called David's seer and is with him even during his early years fleeing from Saul.
Oh, so he was in the caves with him.
Right. And Nathan is a major fixture in the royal court in Jerusalem later on. They are completely embedded within the administration.
So they had access.
Unprecedented access. This means the historical details of 2 Samuel are grounded in contemporary, divinely inspired records written by men who had direct access to the king, to the military campaigns, and to all the political fallout.
They had front row seats to the entire political thriller. But when was all this raw material, these chronicles, actually compiled into the final, cohesive book we read today?
The final editorial compilation likely occurred during the early divided monarchy period. So we're talking the late 10th century to early 9th century BC, shortly after the kingdom split under David's grandson, Rehoboam.
How do we know that?
We know this because of internal textual clues. The author frequently uses the formulaic phrase, unto this day, which signals a vantage point looking back after the death of David.
Okay, like a narrator saying, and it remains that way today.
Exactly. For example, 2 Samuel 5 mentions that the Jebusites live in Jerusalem unto this day, which implies a time before the later exile. But honestly, equally important is what is completely missing from the text.
I love looking at the negative space.
Yeah.
What does the silence of the text tell us here?
It tells us that this document is incredibly ancient. There is a total absence of late exilic linguistic features. There are no Persian loanwords, which you find in later books.
Right.
There is no mention, no implicit familiarity whatsoever with the catastrophic Babylonian deportations that happened centuries later in 586 BC.
Why does that matter so much for our listeners?
Because critical minimalist scholars, and you'll encounter this in commentaries, they often argue that T. Samuel is just some post-exilic fictional construct.
Like it's just propaganda.
Yes. A piece of propaganda invented by a defeated people living under Persian or Hellenistic rule who wanted to create a mythical Golden Age hero just to feel better about themselves.
But the text itself refutes that.
Firmly. The Hebrew syntax, The precise geographical knowledge and, frankly, the raw, unvarnished depiction of the monarchy firmly support a pre-exilic, early divided monarchy provenance. I mean, think about it. If you were inventing a flawless mythical hero to inspire your defeated nation, you wouldn't write to Samuel. You wouldn't include the devastating moral failure.
You wouldn't include chapter 11.
No.
That actually brings up a huge question. Put yourself in the shoes of the original audience for a second. Your nation is just fractured. The glorious unified kingdom of David has split into a bitter, divided northern and southern kingdom.
It's a disaster.
Total disaster. So why did they need this specific text? If I'm suffering through a civil war, reading a book about how our greatest king was actually a deeply flawed guy whose own family fell apart in a civil war doesn't sound very comforting.
Well, it might not be superficially comforting, but it is deeply explanatory. The original audience is experiencing severe political instability. 2 Samuel is written to them for 2 deeply theological reasons.
Okay, let's unpack those.
First, it completely validates the absolute legitimacy of the Davidic dynasty over against the Northern Kingdom's claims. It anchors their ultimate hope in the unconditional covenant God made with David.
Okay, so it says Judah is the legitimate line.
Right. But second, and to your point, this is crucial, it offers a harsh prophetic critique of kingship. It explains why the nation is currently suffering.
I see. It's saying, look at David, our greatest king. Even he was not above the law. It's a mechanism for accountability.
Precisely. It demonstrates that the human king of Israel is fully subordinate to Yahweh's covenant laws. He is not a law unto himself. When the king sins, the nation suffers the temporal consequences.
That's a heavy lesson.
It is. By exposing David's flaws so thoroughly, the book dismantles the myth of the infallible human leader. It ensures the people understand that their ultimate security cannot rest on the moral perfection of a man, but only on the faithfulness of God.
So let's talk about how the author exposes those flaws. Because we aren't just reading a dry encyclopedia of facts. This is theological historiography. The author uses highly sophisticated literary devices to expose the human heart.
Yes, masterful storytelling.
And the best, most painful example of this is the devastating, dramatic irony we see in 2 Samuel 11. For those of you listening, you likely know the basic Sunday school plot, David and Bathsheba. But when you read the actual text, the details they're chilling. Let's set the scene. Chapter 11 opens with a very specific sensory detail.
Great. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem.
Stop right there. The time when kings go out to battle, but David remained.
It's an immediate red flag.
A massive red flag. The author is already indicting him right in the first verse. David is delegating his royal duty. He is idle. And then we get the famous scene. He walks on his roof late in the afternoon, looks down, sees Bathsheba bathing, uses his royal power to take her, and she gets pregnant.
And that's just the beginning of the spiral.
Right, because to cover it up, David realizes he needs to create an alibi.
Yeah.
So he calls her husband, Uriah the Hittite, back from the brutal front lines, hoping Uriah will sleep with his wife and think the baby is his.
And this is where the narrative tension relies on bitter, brilliant irony. Look at who Uriah is. He is a Hittite. Ethnically, he is a Gentile.
He's an outsider.
Yes, he is an outsider who has converted, a proselyte to the faith of Israel. He has even taken a Yahwistic name. Uriah means Yahweh is my light. Yet when David brings him back, gets him drunk, and tries to send him down to his house, Uriah flatly refuses to go.
And the reason he gives is a direct indictment of David's entire current lifestyle.
It's incredible. Uriah says to the king, "The ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing."
Let's just unpack the psychology of that moment. Uriah basically says, how can I go to my comfortable house while the symbol of God's presence, the ark, and my brothers in arms are sleeping in the dirt? It's a staggering display of loyalty.
What's fascinating here is the sheer covenant solidarity Uriah exhibits. He is displaying the exact flawless integrity, the self-sacrifice, and the identification with God's people that is expected of the Israelite king.
Yes.
He refuses to enjoy the comforts of his house. The Hebrew word there is bayit, which we will definitely come back to. Meanwhile, David, the anointed Israelite monarch, the shepherd king, is lounging in his palace, acting with the deceptive, murderous self-interest of a pagan dictator. The irony is meant to be morally sickening to the reader.
It is sickening. The Gentile outsider acts like the ideal Israelite king, while the ideal Israelite king acts like a corrupt Gentile outsider.
Perfect reversal.
And because Uriah's righteousness thwarts David's cover-up, David's panic escalates. He crosses the point of no return. He writes a letter to his commander Joab, ordering him to put Uriah in the front lines where the fighting is fiercest and then pull back so Uriah is killed. And the darkest detail.
Oh, the letter!
David makes Uriah carry his own death warrant back to the battlefield. It is a total, chilling collapse of character.
Which brings us to chapter 12 and the absolute necessity of the prophet Nathan's intervention. God does not let the secret stand. But we have to understand the sheer danger of Nathan's mission here.
It's suicidal.
It really is. Approaching an absolute ancient Near Eastern monarch about his secret, murderous crimes is literally a death sentence. Kings do not like being told they are murderers. If Nathan simply walks into the throne room and points a finger, David's psychological defense mechanisms, his self-preservation instinct, will trigger, and Nathan will likely be executed for treason.
All right, David is in full cover-up mode. He's already killed to keep this quiet. He'll kill again. So Nathan uses a story. I like to think of Nathan's parable as a Trojan horse for the conscience.
That's a great way to put it.
He wheels this seemingly objective legal case into the throne room. He bypasses David's royal defenses by appealing to something deep in David's past, his background as a shepherd.
It is a masterful juridical parable. Nathan presents a case requiring royal adjudication. He tells David about two men in a certain city. One is very rich, with massive flocks and herds. The other is very poor. This poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb.
Just one lamb.
Just one. The Hebrew word used here is kebiah. The author goes to great lengths to stress the emotional attachment here. The text says the lamb grew up with him and his children. It used to eat of his morsel and drink from his cup, and it was like a daughter to him.
It's incredibly vivid. And then the conflict happens.
Right. A traveler comes to the rich man, but instead of taking from his own massive flock to feed the guest, the rich man steals the poor man's kebiah, slaughters it, and serves it to his guest.
You can just feel the trap snapping shut.
Mm-hmm.
It is perfectly designed to trigger David. I mean, think about David's youth. He was a shepherd. He literally risked his life fighting off lions and bears to protect his sheep.
He knows this world intimately.
Hearing a story about a rich, powerful man abusing a poor man by stealing his beloved lamb, it completely bypasses the king's guilt and taps directly into the righteous indignation of the shepherd boy. David's reaction is furious. He practically jumps off the throne.
He does.
He declares, "As the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. He shall restore the lamb fourfold because he had no pity."
Notice what David does there. He pronounces his own objective royal judgment based strictly on the Torah. Exodus 22 actually requires a fourfold restitution for a stolen sheep.
Oh, he quotes the law.
Yes. David has unwittingly climbed inside the Trojan horse, and the exact moment he renders his verdict, Nathan springs the trap. He delivers what is perhaps the most devastating rhetorical blow in all of Scripture. In the Hebrew text, it is just two words, alata hachish, you are the man.
Wow. You are the man. Just let the emotional weight of that land for a second for you listening. The objective, comfortable legal exercise instantly collapses into a deeply personal, inescapable indictment. There's nowhere to hide. The X-ray machine is suddenly turned on David's own heart, and the break is severe. The precision of the storytelling is brilliant.
It is the absolute pinnacle of prophetic confrontation. But, you know, the author's structural brilliance doesn't stop at the chapter level with these micro-narratives.
Where else do we see it?
If we zoom out to the macro structure, specifically the very end of the book, chapters 21 through 24, we see another incredibly sophisticated literary device. This section is generally referred to as the appendix of 2 Samuel.
Okay, let me push back on the word brilliant for a second. Because honestly, as a reader, when you hit chapter 21, it feels, wow, it feels messy.
It can definitely feel that way.
It feels chronologically scrambled. We've just finished the intense linear narrative of Absalom's rebellion and David returning to the throne in chapter 20, and suddenly, boom, we're jumping backward and forward in time. We're reading about a famine. Then there are random lists of warriors killing giants, then a song, then another list, and then a plague.
Right, right.
It feels like the editor just took all the leftover sticky notes from David's life and slapped them at the end of the scroll. Why is the end of the book so disjointed?
It appears disjointed to the modern Western mind because we expect chronological linearity. We want A to B to C, but it isn't scrambled at all. It is meticulously, mathematically organized. Ancient writers didn't have bold text, italics, or bullet points to emphasize their main theological ideas.
So what did they do?
Instead, they used structure. Here, the author uses a deliberate chiastic structure.
Okay, for the listener who might be new to that term, what exactly is a chiasm?
A chiasm is a symmetrical mirroring pattern where the elements correspond to each other, moving toward a central focal point. Think of it like a staircase.
The staircase, okay.
You walk down a set of stairs to a central landing, and then you walk back up an identical set of stairs on the other side. The structure here is A, B, C, and then it mirrors back out. C prime, B prime, A prime.
Okay, let's walk down that staircase together. What are the outer layers?
The outer boundaries A and A prime are found in chapters 21 and 24. These correspond perfectly. Both of these accounts deal with national wrath being averted through sacrifice.
Got it.
In chapter 21, there is a severe 3-year famine caused by a blood guilt. Saul had broken an ancient covenant treaty with the Gibeonites. In chapter 24, there is a devastating plague caused by David's prideful military census. In both cases, the nation is under divine judgment, and deliverance only comes through an intercessory substitutionary act.
Got it. So national judgment and substitutionary deliverance form the outer shell. We step down a level to B and B prime. What's there?
The B sections are the lists of David's mighty warriors and their military exploits. Chapter 21 details victories over the giant descendants of the Philistines. Chapter 23 lists the names and feats of David's top-tier special forces, the 30 and the 3.
Like ancient Navy SEALs.
Exactly. This layer represents human strength, military prowess, the literal muscle and grit of the earthly kingdom.
So we have divine judgment on the outside, human military power on the inside. That brings us to the very center, the landing of the staircase, C and C prime.
Right. The absolute structural center of the appendix, and arguably the thematic beating heart of the entire book, consists of 2 poetic reflections. Chapter 22 is David's massive song of praise to God for past deliverance, which is almost identical to Psalm 18.
Okay.
And chapter 23 begins with David's last words, which is a prophetic oracle regarding the future everlasting covenant God made with his house.
So why go through all the trouble to build this staircase? So what of this chiasm for the person listening to this right now? Why should they care about the structure?
Because it's an instruction manual on how to view reality. The author intentionally frames all of human military achievement, the mighty men, the giant slayers, the expanding borders, inside the terrifying reality of divine judgment and the desperate need for grace.
Oh, wow.
And right in the middle, the anchor holding the entire structure together isn't a battle tactic. It's a song of praise to God's word. It places the true center of the monarchy's security entirely on God's character, not on David's armies.
It completely humbles human achievement. It's the author's way of insisting that Israel's survival wasn't due to Joab's brilliant military tactics or the raw courage of the mighty men, but solely because of the covenant faithfulness of Yahweh.
Precisely. And that concept of covenant faithfulness brings us beautifully to the intertextual and canonical integration of the book.
Moving into section 3 here.
Yes, we have to ask, how does Tani Samuel fit into the grand narrative of the rest of the Bible? To answer that, we must look at the focal point of the book. 2 Samuel chapter 7.
Let me set the scene for chapter 7. David is at the height of his power. He has finally conquered Jerusalem and made it his capital. He's built himself a beautiful, luxurious palace out of imported cedar wood from King Hiram of Tyre.
He's made it.
The wars have paused, he has peace from his enemies, and he sits on his couch, looks out his window, sees the Ark of the Covenant still sitting in a temporary tent, and thinks, "This isn't right. I live in a house of cedar, but the Ark of God dwells in a tent. I'm going to build a glorious temple for God."
On the surface, it seems like an incredibly pious, noble desire. The prophet Nathan initially agrees with him.
Right. Nathan says, "Go do all that is in your heart."
But that night, God speaks to Nathan and uses a profound, multi-layered wordplay on the Hebrew word bayit to turn David's plans completely upside down.
Let's define bayit because this is crucial for the listener.
Bayit has immense semantic flexibility in Hebrew. Depending on the context, it can mean a physical house, a royal palace, a temple, or a multi-generational dynasty. David tells God that he wants to build a bayit, a temple for God to live in.
And God's response is basically to flip the script entirely. God says, "Are you going to build a house for me? No, I am going to build a dynasty for you."
Yes. God says, "Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a bait." But we have to understand why God rejects David's offer. How did this sound to the original readers in their cultural context?
Yeah, how will they hear that?
In the surrounding ancient Near Eastern, Pagan cultures in Egypt, in Babylon, in Canaan kings frequently built massive, opulent houses for their gods.
Right. But let me challenge that. Wasn't it just their way of showing devotion? I mean, why is God so against David showing devotion by building a temple?
Because in the ancient Near East, building a temple was never just about devotion. It was a transaction. It was a mechanism of control. It was known as the care and feeding of the gods.
Care and feeding.
Yes. A king would build a lavish temple to house the deity, provide it with daily food sacrifices, and in return, the deity was legally obligated to grant the king political security, military victory, and agricultural fertility. It was essentially a mechanism to bribe the divine realm into serving the state.
I built you a house, God. Now you owe me a victorious military campaign.
Exactly. It was a deeply ingrained cultural expectation that the divine could be domesticated. But Yahweh delivers a blistering, polemical subversion of this entire ideology. God flatly refuses to be housed as a dependency mechanism.
He reminds David that he has been moving in a tent, freely choosing when and where to go.
Yes. By declaring that he will build the house for the king, God establishes a massive theological boundary. The Israelite monarch is not an absolute divine dictator who can manipulate heaven with architecture. The king is merely an adoptive human vassal, completely dependent on and accountable to God's sovereign grace.
It's an incredible theological reversal. God will not be put in a box, literally or metaphorically. And God doesn't just promise a generic dynasty. If we look closely at the language in 2 Samuel 7, specifically verses 9 through 16, we see a direct canonical link back to the very beginning of the nation of Israel.
Yes, the intertextuality here is breathtaking. We must connect 2 Samuel 7 back to Genesis chapter 12 to the foundational Abrahamic covenant.
Where do we see the overlap?
In 2 Samuel 7.9, God says to David, "I will make for you a great name." That is the exact mirrored phrasing God gave to Abraham centuries earlier. Furthermore, God promises David a secure place for his people, referencing the promised land given to Abraham and an enduring seed. The Hebrew word is zerah, the same word used for Abraham's offspring, whose kingdom will be established forever.
Why does this exact matching language matter for you guys listening? Because it shows you the breathtaking progression of redemptive history. God isn't starting over with David. He's not writing a new script. The global blessings promised to a nomadic patriarch wandering in the desert, Abraham, are now being formally institutionalized into a national kingdom through David's royal house.
It's beautiful.
The promise is narrowing its focus onto a specific royal bloodline, the Davidic line, but with the ultimate goal of blessing the entire world.
It demonstrates irrefutably that the biblical canon is unified, the covenant is progressive. What was given to a family is now given to a nation, maintaining a forward trajectory toward an ultimate worldwide fulfillment.
Okay, so if the human king is just a vassal and God is the one actually building the house, what is the driving force of this entire narrative? Let's shift into the theological themes that govern 2 Samuel.
The central theological theme that sustains everything in 2 Samuel, the invisible engine driving the narrative, is Yahweh's hest.
Okay, I hear that word thrown around a lot in theological circles. Can you explain hesed like I'm 5? Because it's often just translated as mercy or loving kindness, which sounds, well, a bit soft.
Soft is exactly the wrong way to view it. Hesed is a rich, robust Hebrew concept that doesn't have a clean one-word English equivalent. It means covenant loyalty, unfailing grace, or steadfast, merciful love. But it is fundamentally a legal and relational term.
Legal and relational.
Yes. It implies a binding, structural commitment to someone, coupled with a fierce, loyal love that goes far beyond what the law strictly requires. It is sovereign initiative.
So it's not just a feeling of affection, it's a binding promise. Hesed is the glue holding the universe together when human leaders fall apart.
That is a perfect way to phrase it. The text makes it undeniably clear that divine grace, God's Hesed, is the only thing that sustains the nation of Israel, despite the systemic, repeated failures of its leaders. God's Hesed is what preserves David's line through coups, civil wars, assassinations, and deep moral compromises.
Even when David completely drops the ball.
Exactly. God swore an oath in chapter 7, and his Hesed means he will not break it, even when David deserves to be abandoned.
But that raises a massive question for the listener. If the king isn't a pagan dictator who can do whatever he wants, and his kingdom is only sustained by God's grace, what is the ideal king supposed to look like? What's the job description?
The book introduces the concept of the theocratic under-shepherd. The true monarch is supposed to rule with mishpat tzedakah, which translates to justice and righteousness.
Justice and righteousness.
He is to perfectly reflect the moral character of Yahweh to the people. He doesn't invent the law. He enforces and submits to the Torah that God has already given through Moses. He's the lead worshiper, the chief defender of the weak.
Which, as we saw in chapter 11, David famously fails to do when he abuses his power against Uriah and Bathsheba.
And this brings us to one of the most sobering pastoral applications in the entire book. We have to talk about the illusion of private sin and the reality of temporal consequences.
This is a vital point.
Let's look back at David's repentance in chapter 12. There is a profound, almost agonizing tension in 2 Samuel 12 that we must clarify, especially for those in ministry. When David is confronted by Nathan, his psychological defenses collapse. He finally confesses, offering no excuses, "I have sinned against Yahweh." And Nathan immediately responds, "Yahweh also has put away your sin, you shall not die."
Stop there. That is staggering. Under the law, an adulterer and a murderer is supposed to be stoned to death, but God simply puts it away. David is completely forgiven. He is justified. His eternal standing before God is restored instantly by grace.
Yes, the grace is absolute, and yet we have to read the rest of the book.
Right, because the rest of the book is an absolute nightmare for David's family.
The text does not shy away from the temporal consequences of his actions. Nathan tells him, "Because you have done this, the sword shall never depart from your house." And it doesn't.
He really doesn't.
His family life collapses into a cycle of violence, incest, and betrayal that mirrors his own secret sins. We see his son Amnon brutally assault his half-sister Tamar. We see his other son, Absalom, murder Amnon in revenge. And then we see Absalom launch a full-scale, devastating civil war to dethrone his own father, forcing David to flee Jerusalem weeping, barefoot, and humiliated.
And this is so applicable for you listening today. It completely shatters the modern illusion of private sin. We desperately like to think that what we do behind closed doors in the dark on our screens only affects us.
Right, it's my own business.
But David's actions were executed in absolute secrecy. He thought he had buried the problem when he buried Uriah. Yet those secret seeds grew into thorns that tore his entire nation apart. It emphasizes that choices carry real, enduring consequences in this life, even when complete grace and forgiveness are present.
That is a stark, necessary truth. Grace saves your soul, but it doesn't always stop the bullet you fired from hitting its target. God's hesed does not cancel out his holiness.
Speaking of God's holiness, I want to bring up a story earlier in the book that I think really bothers modern readers. We see this tension between grace and holiness violently collide in 2 Samuel 6 regarding what we might call presumptuous worship.
Yes, Uzzah.
I'm talking about the story of Uzzah. Let me set this up. David is finally moving the Ark of the Covenant up to Jerusalem. It's a massive parade. They put the Ark on a shiny new ox cart. But they hit a bump at the threshing floor of Nekon. The oxen stumble. The Ark is about to fall into the mud. So Uzzah reaches out his hand to steady it, and God strikes him dead on the spot.
It is a shocking moment in the narrative.
Honestly, it feels like God has a hair-triggered temper here. Uzzah is just trying to help. He's protecting the sacred object from getting dirty. Striking him dead feels like a massive overreaction. How do we explain this?
It feels like an overreaction only if we view God merely as a benevolent, grandfatherly figure who appreciates our good intentions rather than the terrifyingly perfect, holy sovereign of the universe. The death of Uzzah is a severe, necessary warning against approaching the divine presence with pragmatism or convenience.
What do you mean by pragmatism here?
God had given explicit written instructions in the Torah, specifically in Numbers chapter 4, regarding how the ark was to be transported. It was to be carried on poles resting on the shoulders of a specific Levitical family, the Kohathites.
Oh, not on a cart.
Exactly. It was never to be touched directly under penalty of death. Why? Because it represented the localized, concentrated presence of the holy God. But David and his men ignored God's word. Instead of submitting to the biblical mandate, they adopted a modern, technologically efficient method, the Philistine ox cart, to transport it.
I see. They prioritize their own efficiency and convenience over God's explicit commands regarding his holiness.
Exactly. Uzzah's error was a fatal presumption. By reaching out to catch the ark, Uzzah presumed that his own human hands were cleaner than the dirt the ark was about to fall on.
Right.
The dirt was just doing what dirt was created to do. It wasn't tainted by rebellion. Uzzah's hands were one. The narrative reminds the reader that Yahweh's presence is dangerous if approached casually. He must be approached with reverent fear and strictly according to his terms, not our own well-intentioned, pragmatic shortcuts.
That is a heavy word for anyone in church leadership today who is tempted to use worldly methods to carry the presence of God. Okay, we are entering the final stretch of our deep dive. We've talked about the history, the failures, the theology. But how does all of this point forward? What is the Christological focus of 2 Samuel?
We have to get to this.
Because if this is just a tragic story about a flawed king, it's a bit depressing. Let's go to the very end of the book, chapter 24. This is the A-prime section of that chiasm we discussed. There is a terrible plague sweeping the land because of David's prideful census. 70,000 people have died. The destroying angel stops right over the threshing floor of a man named Araunah the Jebusite. God commands David to build an altar exactly on that spot.
Araunah is terrified, understandably. He sees the king coming, he sees the angel, and he offers to give David the land, the oxen for the sacrifice, and the wooden yokes for the fire, completely for free. He just wants the plague to stop.
But David refuses the free gift. He says to Araunah, "No, but I will buy it from you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing."
This exchange is theologically monumental. It establishes the costly reality of substitution. David finally recognizes his role as the intercessor for his people, and he realizes that true propitiation, the turning away of divine wrath, requires a sacrifice of genuine cost.
He refuses cheap grace.
He refuses a cheap approach to grace. He pays 50 shekels of silver, builds the altar, and the plague is averted.
And the geography here is no accident, right? I mean, if the threshing floor is just an empty rock on a hill, why this specific rock?
Geography in biblical theology is rarely an accident. This specific location, Araunah's threshing floor, is located on Mount Moriah.
Wait, Moriah.
Yes. This is the exact geographic site where centuries earlier, Abraham bound Isaac and God provided a substitute ram. It is the exact site where David's son Solomon will eventually build the Great Temple, institutionalizing the sacrificial system. And most importantly, it points undeniably forward to the ultimate costly sacrifice.
Jesus Christ, the final sacrifice on a hill outside Jerusalem that actually cost the king everything to avert the judgment of God from his people? That is beautiful. It all connects. But, we don't just see Christ in the theology of the sacrifice. We see glimpses of Christ's heart in how David treats the broken.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to highlight 2 Samuel 9, the story of Mephibosheth. Let's talk about empathy and action for the marginalized.
This is one of the most poignant narratives in the historical books. Mephibosheth is the son of Jonathan, which makes him the grandson of King Saul. The text tells us he was crippled in both feet as a young child. His nurse dropped him while they were fleeing in terror when news arrived that his father and grandfather had been killed in battle.
Now, in standard ancient Near Eastern practice, when a new dynasty takes over the throne, what do they historically do to the surviving members of the previous royal family?
They wipe them out entirely. It's the only way to prevent a future rebellion or a rival claim to the throne. By all cultural logic and political pragmatism, Mephibosheth is a threat, and he should be executed.
But David doesn't do that. Because of the covenant he made with Jonathan years earlier, David actively searches for Mephibosheth. He finds him hiding in a barren, desolate place called Lodabar, which literally translates to no pasture or no word.
A place of nothingness.
Exactly. And instead of sending the executioner's sword, David extends haste. He brings this terrified, crippled rival into his throne room. He restores all of Saul's generational land to him and says, "You shall always eat at my table."
It is a living, breathing picture of covenantal grace. David brings the broken, the marginalized, the helpless into his own palace and seats him at the royal table as one of his own sons.
For you listening to this is deeply personal. Yes, it's a beautiful model for us regarding empathy, multi-generational discipleship, and how we treat the broken in our own communities. But far more than that, it is a mirror reflecting the gospel. It is a picture of how the ultimate king, Jesus, receives broken, spiritually crippled enemies, people like us, hiding in our own desolate places, and adopts us into his royal family, seating us at his banquet table forever.
If we synthesize all of this, the grace, the failure, the covenants, the sacrifice, we arrive at the central nervous system of the book of 2 Samuel. The author has taken us through the dizzying heights of David's military triumphs and the agonizing, squalid depths of his moral and familial collapse. Why? Because the catastrophic failures of David's house intentionally highlight the structural limits of human leadership.
Even the absolute best guy isn't good enough.
Exactly. David is literally designated as a man after God's own heart. He is a brilliant poet, a fearless warrior, a unifying statesman, yet he is also a murderer, an adulterer, a passive father whose family falls apart, and a proud king whose arrogance brings a plague upon his people.
It's quite the resume.
It is. This tension creates a deep, aching expectation in the reader. It forces you to look beyond the human institution of the monarchy. It creates a massive theological vacuum that can only be filled by the ultimate, unblemished King, the Messiah, the promised seed of 2 Samuel 7, who will perfectly rule with justice and righteousness, who will bear the cost of our sin, and who will eternally fulfill the Davidic covenant.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack this as we wrap up today's deep dive. I want to leave you with a lingering, provocative reflection inspired by this incredible ancient text. We live in a world where, if we are honest, we are constantly looking for a human political savior. We are always searching for the right candidate, the right CEO, the right leader with the right policies to finally fix everything that is broken in our society.
We want a perfect human king.
We do. But 2 Samuel, written 3,000 years ago, drops a heavy, unshakable truth bomb right into the middle of our modern anxieties. Think about it. King David was the absolute best-case scenario for a human leader. He was literally anointed by God. He had prophets giving him direct counsel.
You can't get better advisors than that.
No.
What?
And yet, even he was structurally limited. He was deeply flawed. He brought judgment upon his own people, and his own house was torn apart by violence. If King David couldn't even save his own family from disaster, no modern politician can save ours.
That's a sobering thought.
But here is a twist I want you to mull over as you leave today. We live in a culture that demands moral perfection from its leaders, a cancel culture that instantly discards anyone the moment their profound flaws are exposed. If 2 Samuel were written today, David wouldn't just be impeached, he would be utterly destroyed in the court of public opinion, erased from history. And on a purely human level, he would desert it.
He absolutely would.
Yet God didn't cancel David. God disciplined him severely. But he still used this deeply fractured, compromised man to build the very foundations of redemptive history. It makes you wonder, is our modern unforgiving demand for absolute moral perfection actually blinding us to the scandalous, messy kind of grace that God uses to build his kingdom?
It's a powerful question.
If God can weave his eternal promises through the wreckage of David's life, what does that say about how he views our own brokenness? It challenges you to ask, where are you really placing your ultimate hope? On a flawed human system, or on the only true king whose reign will never fail, the one who took the cost of our brokenness upon himself on a hill outside Jerusalem? Something to think about.
Very well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an absolute privilege to explore this rigorous, majestic text with you. Keep asking the hard questions, keep digging into the Word, and we will see you next time.